The boardroom door slipped shut just as my fingertips brushed the handle, and through the frosted glass I could see 7 shadows settling into chairs around that gleaming conference table. My conference table, the one where I'd unveiled my prototype 18 months ago, my voice shaking with excitement as I revealed what 3 years of 18-hour days in my garage had created. Oh, Kira. The voice behind me belonged to Brick Hayes, the VP of Strategic Development, his tone carrying that familiar corporate superiority that makes your skin prickle. Sorry, but this is exec only. We're handling the client presentation internally. I turned back slowly, keeping my expression steady even though something quietly crumpled inside my chest. Of course, I said, forcing what I hoped looked like acceptance. I'll wait outside. The truth was, I had built that technology from the ground up. Every algorithm, every interface, every breakthrough that made our system 30% faster than anything else on the market was mine. When they acquired my startup for what felt like life-changing money at the time, I stayed on as what they called a senior consultant, a deliberately vague title that kept me in the shadows while they strutted around in suits taking credit for innovation they couldn't even properly explain. But this wasn't just another client pitch. The $50 million contract they were about to present belonged to Elias Morton, the first investor who believed in my vision when everyone else said it was impossible. The man who sat in my cramped garage office drinking terrible coffee from mismatched mugs while I explained wireframes drawn on napkins. My name is Kira Thorne. I'm 28 years old. And until that moment, I believed I could swallow anything for the sake of financial security. I was wrong. Let me pause here for a moment. Before I go on, take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I want to know how far my story reaches people who might be facing something similar. And please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one, because what I'm about to share changed everything for me, and maybe it can help you too. The hallway felt endless as I walked away from that boardroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown, and I could hear muffled voices beginning the presentation through the walls. They were using my slides, my research, my 3 years of failed experiments and breakthrough moments. They were selling my dreams to the very person who'd helped me shape them. I reached my office, a cramped corner space shoved into the far end of the building, nothing like the sunlit rooms the executives enjoyed. I sat at my desk and stared at the single photo I kept there. Me and my dad in his workshop when I was 12, both of us smeared in grease, smiling over some battered engine we'd managed to repair together. He passed away before he could see what I'd built. But he always told me the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's proving them irrelevant. For the first time in 18 months, I wasn't thinking about staying quiet or playing it safe. I was thinking about that clause buried deep in my acquisition contract, the one my lawyer pushed for even when I thought it unnecessary. The clause stating that if the company ever misrepresented or misused my technology, I retained certain rights. The presentation lasted 2 hours. I know because I watched every executive leave that boardroom with smug triumph plastered across their faces. Broderick even had the nerve to give me a thumbs up as he passed my doorway, as if I should feel honored to witness their success from the sidelines. That night, I went home and pulled out a box I hadn't touched since the acquisition. Inside were all my original notebooks, prototype sketches, and early correspondence with Elias. Every late-night brainstorming session was preserved in handwritten notes and email threads. Every breakthrough moment was time-stamped and signed by both of us. More importantly, I still had his personal phone number. I called him at 11 p.m., not through corporate routes or intermediaries, but directly, the way we used to talk when I was just a woman with an improbable idea, and he was the only investor bold enough to believe in it. "Kira," he said, surprised but warm. "I didn't expect to hear from you tonight. The presentation today was impressive, though I have to admit, Something felt off. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Well, he paused, and I could imagine him in his home office wearing one of those worn sweaters he liked during evening calls. The team seemed to struggle with certain technical points. When I asked about the original spark behind the core algorithm, they gave me plenty of corporate jargon but no real story. You know how much I value the human element behind innovation. This was it. The opening I needed. But I had to be cautious. I couldn't sound resentful or vengeful. I had to sound professional, thoughtful, and above all, honest. Elias, I said carefully, can I ask you something? Do you remember our conversation about intellectual integrity? The one in my garage about how the tech world has a habit of letting people claim credit for work they never did? The silence stretched just long enough to twist my stomach. I remember, he said at last. Kira, are you telling me something I need to know? Over the next hour, I explained everything, not with fury or accusation, but with evidence. I sent him photos of my original sketches, timestamps from my development logs, and our early email exchanges. I showed him the clause in the acquisition contract about misrepresentation. I let the evidence speak on its own, and the best part was that I didn't have to persuade him of anything. He remembered our conversations, our collaborative building process, the way I could answer technical questions that even my hired developers struggled with. He had always known the technology originated with me, but he'd assumed the company was properly crediting me as its creator. Kira, he said when I finished, I want you to know that if this is accurate, and based on what I recall, it absolutely is, then I cannot in good conscience move forward with this contract. More than that, I think we need to have a very different conversation about the future. What kind of conversation? The kind where I ask if you'd consider starting over with proper funding, proper ownership, and proper recognition for your work. I've been looking for someone with your vision to lead a new initiative I've been planning. My hands trembled, but not from fear. This time it was possibility. I'd like to hear more. How about we meet tomorrow? Not in some corporate boardroom, but somewhere we can actually talk. I'll bring my development team leaders, the ones who handle technical due diligence. I want them to hear directly from the source what makes this technology groundbreaking. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for hours staring at the city lights outside my window, and for the first time since the acquisition, I felt like myself again. Not a consultant, not an advisor, not someone grateful just to watch others present her work, but an innovator with worth that couldn't be replaced or replicated. The next morning, I arrived early. I needed to prepare for what was coming and gather additional evidence. I printed every email, every development log, every timestamp proving the timeline of my ideas. I documented every meeting where my concepts were discussed, every presentation where my work appeared without my name. Around 10 a.m., Brick stopped by my office, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. Great news, Kira, he said, leaning against the doorframe like we were old friends. The client is moving forward with preliminary discussions. The team really knocked it out of the park yesterday. That's wonderful, I replied evenly. I'm sure everyone worked very hard to make it happen. They did. Moments like these show the value of strong leadership guiding complex client relationships. It takes experience to handle deals this big. I nodded. Absolutely. Experience and credibility mean everything in situations like this. He walked away looking proud of himself, completely unaware his world was about to collapse. At noon, my phone rang. It was Elias. Kira, I've made my decision. I'm pulling out of negotiations with your current company immediately. Their representation of the technology was misleading at best, and I won't partner with organizations that mishandle intellectual contributions. I understand, I said, though my heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear him. But I have a proposal for you. I want to fund your new company. your technology, your leadership, your vision. I'm prepared to invest an initial $15 million dollars with the potential for much more as you scale. You'd retain majority ownership and full creative control. The room seemed to tilt. Elias, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Then say goodbye to people who don't value what you've built. Yes, I whispered. Absolutely, yes. Excellent. I'm sending the official withdrawal to your current company this afternoon. I expect they'll want to schedule emergency meetings to figure out what went wrong. What went wrong? As if it were some complex corporate mystery, instead of the obvious consequence of pushing the actual creator out of discussions about her own work. Within an hour, the executive floor was pure chaos. I heard frantic conversations behind closed doors, phones ringing nonstop, assistants rushing back and forth with stacks of documents. The $50 million deal that looked guaranteed that morning was collapsing in real time. Brick appeared in my doorway again, but now his expression was entirely different. The smugness gone, replaced with something that looked a lot like panic. Kira, he said, stepping fully into my office and shutting the door behind him. We need to talk. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding with the Morton Group. They're claiming there were misrepresentations in our presentation. That does sound serious, I replied, turning from my computer to face him directly. What sort of misrepresentations? They're asking about the original development team, the innovation timeline, very technical details that feel, I don't know, oddly specific. I watched him fumble for words that wouldn't confess what we both already understood. Maybe they just want to understand the technology more deeply, I offered. Some clients appreciate hearing the full story behind what they're investing in. His face reddened slightly. Right. Well, the thing is, you were obviously heavily involved in the early development. If they want someone with that historical perspective, you might be the best person to speak with them. After 18 months of being pushed into the background, they finally needed me front and center. I'd be glad to help, I said carefully, though I should mention that Elias Morton and I have quite a bit of history. He was my original investor before the acquisition. The color drained from Brick's face so fast I nearly felt sorry for him. Nearly. Your original investor? Oh yes, we worked very closely during those early phases, hands-on collaboration. He knows exactly what my role was in creating the technology. Brick exited my office without another word. The afternoon delivered a steady parade of executives to my door, each more frantic than the last. First came Camille Sterling, the chief technology officer who'd never written a single line of code. Then Fletcher Morris, the VP of Innovation who couldn't explain how innovation even happens. One after another, they begged for my help salvaging a deal, collapsing because they'd cut out the only person who could actually answer the client's questions. But the window had closed. By 5 p.m., Elias had sent formal documentation to the company's legal department, officially withdrawing from all negotiations and citing concerns about intellectual property misrepresentation. His letter specifically demanded clarification about the original development team and detailed proof of each member's actual contributions to the core system. These executives had built their careers on claiming credit for work they barely understood, and now someone was asking them to verify their expertise. At 6 p.m., I submitted my resignation, brief, professional, and effective immediately. By 6:30, I walked out of that building for the final time, carrying only my belongings and the deep satisfaction of knowing everything was shifting. The calls started that night. First Brick, then Camille, then Fletcher, all suddenly eager to talk through my departure and explore paths forward. All of them abruptly very interested in acknowledging my contributions. Too little, far too late. The next morning, I woke up as the majority owner of a fully funded tech company backed by one of the most respected investors in the industry. The morning after, I read in the business news that 7 executives from my former company had resigned following the collapse of their biggest potential contract. The most poetic part was that I never had to destroy them. I simply let the truth rise to the surface. When someone asks you to prove you built something and you can't, the conversation usually ends on its own. The resignations made headlines, not because of who these individuals were, but because 7 senior executives leaving within 72 hours signaled something catastrophic behind the scenes. I got the details from Jasmine, my former cubicle neighbor who'd always been kind. She called 3 days after I'd left, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kira, what did you do?" she asked, not accusing, but astonished. "I told the truth," I said. "That's all." "Well, the truth just blew up the entire leadership structure. They held an emergency board meeting yesterday. Apparently, when Elias backed out, he didn't do it quietly. He sent a full report to the board explaining exactly why he wouldn't work with a company that distorted intellectual property." My stomach fluttered, but with vindication, not fear. Jasmine went on. "The board demanded documentation showing who actually created the core tech. When the executives couldn't provide it, they started blaming each other. Brick threw Camille under the bus, saying she should have known the technical details, and Camille blamed Fletcher for not maintaining proper development records, while Fletcher insisted it was everyone else's responsibility to verify information before client presentations. Yet none of them could actually explain how the technology worked." I said exactly. The board brought in independent technical reviewers to assess the situation, and guess whose name appeared on every single patent application, every development milestone, every breakthrough documentation? Mine. Because I had been meticulous about documentation, even when I thought no one would ever need to verify my contributions, the board gave them a choice. Jasmine said, "Resign quietly or face a public investigation into intellectual property fraud." They all chose resignation. After that call, I sat in my new office, a bright windowed space in a building I'd chosen specifically because it felt nothing like my old workplace, and tried to process what had happened. 7 people who had made my life miserable for 18 months had essentially erased themselves from my professional landscape. Not because I schemed or manipulated or destroyed them, but because they'd built their careers on a foundation that couldn't withstand basic scrutiny. The irony was staggering. They'd excluded me from the meeting because they thought I wasn't important enough to be there, but excluding the actual creator of the technology from discussions about that technology exposed the fact that none of them understood what they were selling. My new company launched 6 weeks later. Elias introduced me to a team of brilliant developers who actually wanted to understand my vision instead of just profiting from it. We called the company Apex Innovations, simple, direct, and completely owned by me. The first major client meeting was surreal. I sat at the head of a conference table in my own building, presenting technology I'd created to people who respected my expertise, answering technical questions myself instead of watching someone else stumble through explanations they didn't comprehend. But the real validation came 4 months later when Elias brought me an opportunity that made my original $50 million deal look modest. "Kira," he said during one of our weekly strategy meetings, he had contacts in the aerospace industry looking for exactly the kind of innovation I'd developed, but scaled for much larger applications. $200 million to start, with potential for international expansion worth significantly more. I stared at him, remembering the months I felt grateful just to have a job working on my own technology. "What's the timeline?" I asked. They wanted to meet next month. Just me, specifically requesting to work directly with the original innovator. The meeting took place in a conference room overlooking the city skyline, and as I presented my expanded vision, I kept thinking about that closed boardroom door from almost a year earlier, the click of the handle, the dismissive voice telling me I wasn't important enough to be included. This time, I was the only person in the room they wanted to hear from. The aerospace executives signed the contract that afternoon. 6 months later, my former company was acquired by a larger corporation for significantly less than its projected value. Losing the Morton Group deal had triggered investor confidence issues and client trust concerns, and business articles mentioned leadership instability and questions about intellectual property management. I learned about the acquisition from a LinkedIn notification. Several former colleagues reached out to congratulate me on my success, mentioning they were seeking new opportunities as layoffs loomed. But the message that caught my attention came from an unexpected source. Brick Hayes sent me a connection request with a personal note. Kira, I hope we can put the past behind us. I've learned a lot about the importance of proper attribution and would love to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I stared at his message for a long time. This was the same man who spent 18 months treating me like an inconvenient afterthought, who smirked when I was excluded from presenting my own work, who took credit for innovations he couldn't even explain. Now, he wanted to collaborate. I declined the connection request without responding. Some people think revenge means making your enemies suffer. But the most satisfying revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies become irrelevant. Brick wasn't my problem anymore. He was just someone I used to work with who'd made some poor choices. My company now employs 43 people, all of them properly credited for their contributions, with contracts worth over $600 million, and 3 of our innovations licensed by companies in 12 different countries. I own 78% of a business that industry analysts value at nearly $500 million, but more importantly, I wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing instead of dreading another day of watching other people present my ideas. The technology that started in my garage has evolved into applications for renewable energy, medical devices, and space exploration. Last month, I gave a keynote speech at the International Innovation Conference about the importance of intellectual integrity and supporting original thinkers, and afterward a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes, telling me she'd been working at a company where male colleagues took credit for her research, and she'd been considering leaving the field. "Your story gave me hope," she said. "It showed me that the truth has power even when it takes time to surface." I gave her my contact information and told her about the mentorship program we'd started at Apex Innovations, and 3 months later, she joined our team as a research director. That's the thing about authentic success. It creates opportunities to lift other people up instead of just climbing over them. Sometimes I drive past my old office building, now mostly empty since the acquisition, with weeds growing through the asphalt cracks of the parking lot where I used to sit in my car, psyching myself up for another day of invisibility. But I don't feel vindictive. I feel grateful. Those 18 months of frustration and exclusion taught me exactly what kind of leader I didn't want to become, showed me the difference between authority based on position and authority based on competence, and proved that you don't have to destroy people who underestimate you. You just have to build something so undeniably excellent that their opinions become meaningless. The last I heard, Brick was consulting for small tech startups. Camille took a project management job at a mid-level company, and Fletcher moved into sales where his lack of technical knowledge mattered less. They all landed somewhere. That's the corporate world. There's always another position for people who manage without creating. But there's only one person who can claim to have built what I built, and that person is me. Looking back, I realized that when they closed that boardroom door, they didn't just exclude me from a meeting, they freed me from the illusion that I needed their approval to succeed. They forced me to remember that I had built something valuable, not because of their guidance, but in spite of their interference. The girl who spent 3 years in a garage surviving on determination and terrible coffee didn't need permission to be brilliant. She needed the courage to stop asking for it. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where people are taking credit for your work, excluding you from opportunities you've earned, or making you feel like you should be grateful just to be in the room, listen carefully. Your value doesn't decrease because someone else fails to recognize it. Your contributions don't become less significant because someone else presents them. Document everything, keep records, maintain relationships with people who understand your capabilities, and never let anyone convince you that being overlooked is the same as being unimportant. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially in a connected world where intellectual property and original contributions can be verified. People who build careers on other people's work are building on sand. Eventually, someone will ask them to prove what they claim to know, and their foundation will crumble. Your job isn't to destroy them. Your job is to build something so authentic and excellent that when that moment comes, you're ready to show the world what you're truly capable of. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and tell me in the comments what you're building, what you're fighting for, or what truth you're ready to let surface. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay invisible, because these stories matter. They remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stop waiting for permission and start believing in their own value. The world needs what you've created. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.